Hi, I'm Sly Grandpa. Let's start our story. I'll never forget the moment they told me to leave. My grandson's wedding, the day I had been waiting for since I held him in my arms as a baby, and I wasn't welcome. It didn't happen with a quiet word or a gentle hand on my shoulder. No. The bride's family made a show of it. Her mother, wearing a dress that cost more than my first car, looked at me with that fake smile people reserve for stray dogs. She said, "This is a family moment. You don't belong here. Please leave before you embarrass yourself." The bride herself giggled. My own flesh and blood, my grandson, stood frozen, not even looking me in the eye. And when I opened my mouth to speak, her father cut me off with a sneer, "We don't need some washed-up old man dragging the mood down." Laughter rippled through the tables. Some guests shifted uncomfortably, but no one stopped them. Not even my daughter, who avoided my gaze like a coward. I felt something sharp in my chest, not from age or weakness, but from humiliation. They thought I was a relic, a burden, a nuisance better left outside in the cold night air. So I left. Slowly. I could hear the music pick back up behind me as if I were nothing more than a hiccup in their celebration. I walked past the valet, past the luxury cars lined up, and into the quiet street. But as I walked away, I didn't feel broken. I felt something else, an old, familiar fire that hadn't burned in years. They had no idea who they just humiliated. They thought I was just an old man. And that was their first mistake. I didn't go home right away. I walked. My knees aren't what they used to be, but I kept going, block after block, until the noise of the wedding faded into the distance. Somewhere between the dim streetlights and the cool night air, I remembered another night years ago. A night when someone had tried to humiliate me, too. Back then, I wasn't a grandfather. I wasn't even a father yet. I was a man in uniform. I'll spare you the details for now, but let's just say I've seen humiliation delivered by people far more dangerous than a smug bride and her pampered family. I've seen it on the battlefield. I've seen it in boardrooms. And I've learned one thing: humiliation is just the spark. What follows can burn an empire down. When I finally got home, I didn't pour myself a drink. Didn't cry. Didn't curse their names. Instead, I opened the old cedar chest at the back of my closet. Inside were scraps of a life my family had never bothered to ask about. A few medals, letters, photographs, and one small notebook filled with names and numbers. I ran my fingers across the cover. It wasn't nostalgia I felt. It was calculation. Cold, quiet calculation. My family thought they had stripped me of dignity tonight, but what they didn't know was that I still held something much more dangerous than pride: leverage. The bride's family had money, sure. Influence, too. But I had history. And history is full of debts that can be collected at the right time. So I sat down, lit the old brass lamp, and began writing. Not with the shaky hand of a tired old man, but with precision. Names, dates, assets, connections. Everything I still remembered, everything that might prove useful. Because if they wanted me out of the picture, they were about to learn something I've known all my life: sometimes the person you push aside is the one holding the matchbook. And I had every intention of striking a flame. The next morning, I did what they least expected: nothing. No angry phone calls, no confrontations, no guilt-tripping messages about family and respect. I let them believe they'd won. That's the beauty of silence: it makes people arrogant. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table with my notebook open, and I started connecting dots. My daughter had married into the bride's family business circle years ago. A construction firm, flashy on the outside, rotten on the inside. I'd done my homework, quietly, back when they first came around. I never said anything, because back then I still believed in letting my children make their own mistakes. But now their mistakes were my ammunition. Here's what they didn't know: before retirement, before being grandpa in the corner with the crossword puzzle, I'd been a corporate investigator. I dug through shell companies, traced hidden assets, exposed fraud that toppled men who thought themselves untouchable. I was damn good at it, too. The kind of good that doesn't go away just because your hair goes gray. So I started small. I pulled up old contacts, people who owed me favors. A banker in Zurich. A lawyer in New York. A retired colonel with a memory sharper than a blade. Each call was careful, casual, like checking in with an old friend. But each one dropped a stone into the pond. Ripples were forming. Meanwhile, I played the part of the hurt, silent grandfather. My daughter sent me a single text, "Sorry about the other night, Dad." It was complicated. That was it. Not even a phone call. I didn't reply. Why would I? Silence is a weapon, too. But behind that silence, I was already building a case. Not a legal one, not yet, but a case for revenge. A trail of evidence, a map of pressure points, a list of ways to pull the rug out from under them. They thought I was finished. They thought I'd shuffle away and fade into the background. But the truth was, I'd only just taken my seat at the table. And this time, I wasn't the guest. I was the dealer. A week passed. Long enough for the glow of the wedding to fade, long enough for people to stop posting photos online of the perfect day. I didn't say a word to anyone in the family. Not my daughter. Not my grandson. Certainly not the bride. But I was busy. One of my old contacts, a lawyer with a fondness for cigars and loose lips, sent me a little gift. A stack of filings and contracts tied to the bride's family business. Let's just say their construction empire was built on sand. Shell companies, offshore accounts, falsified invoices. They weren't just shady. They were sloppy. And sloppy is something I can work with. I didn't march into their office waving the papers. That's not how you dismantle people like this. No, I started smaller. Quieter. The bride's father prided himself on being untouchable. So I tugged on a thread, one of his subcontractors. A man who'd been stiffed on payments, bleeding money, desperate. I accidentally reconnected with him through an old veteran buddy who owed me a favor. A meeting over coffee, just two old men talking about bad deals and worse people. By the end, he wasn't just venting, he was handing me documents he'd been too afraid to use. Meanwhile, I made sure the family still thought of me as irrelevant. My daughter dropped by once with leftovers, left them on the counter, and barely stayed 5 minutes. She looked guilty, but not guilty enough. That was fine. Guilt has a way of growing if you leave it alone. The funny thing about revenge is that it's a lot like chess. Everyone else sees the board one move at a time. I see 10. They thought they'd cut me out of their lives like trimming fat. But they didn't realize I'd been sharpening my knife long before they sat down at the table. And as I looked at the growing pile of evidence on my desk, one thought kept circling in my head. I wouldn't just ruin their reputation. I'd make them turn on each other. Because nothing shatters glass faster than cracks from the inside. I waited. Patience is underrated in revenge. Most people want fireworks, but real damage is quieter, insidious. It started with a call from the subcontractor I'd helped. Nothing incriminating yet, just a casual mention of misfiled invoices and unpaid work. But I knew where that whisper could lead. I passed it along, carefully, to the right journalist, a woman with a nose for corruption and a soft spot for underdogs. By the time the bride's father read the article in his morning paper, he was already sweating. Construction firm under federal review for financial irregularities. I didn't send the article. I didn't have to. The ripple was enough. Then came the first family panic. My daughter called, her voice shaking. "Dad, have you heard? There's some investigation. I don't know why, but people are talking. Are you involved? I chuckled softly, pretending to sip my tea. No, sweetheart. Just reading the news like everyone else. The key is letting them think they're losing control on their own. Every phone call, every meeting, every glance at the newspaper made them unravel a little more. And the bride? I hadn't even needed to touch her yet. She was still glowing from her wedding day, oblivious to the fact that her perfect world had a single, silent predator lurking in the shadows. But here's the thing, my moves weren't random. Each one was a breadcrumb leading back to me, if they were clever enough to see it. And some of them would start noticing soon. Some would get scared. Some would make mistakes, exactly the kind I could exploit. By the end of the week, I had a small army of whispers working for me. A few disgruntled employees, a couple of lawyers with old scores to settle, and one very nervous reporter. I was still just Grandpa, the old man who'd been humiliated at the wedding. But the first domino had fallen. And it would not be the last. By now, the bride's family could feel the walls closing in. The father paced his office like a caged tiger, muttering about auditors, federal reviews, and lost contracts. The mother was busy sending frantic emails, trying to fix problems she barely understood. And the bride? She was starting to notice the tension, though she still thought it had nothing to do with me. That's the beauty of underestimation. They didn't even consider that the man they humiliated had a past that could touch every part of their lives. I wasn't just an old man with a grudge. I was the kind of man who toppled corporations for less than this. I played it carefully, like a conductor. I nudged one family member here, whispered a rumor there. One small leak to a business partner, another to an employee who had grievances. By the time the father stormed into a board meeting demanding answers, the team was already pointing fingers at each other. And it was delicious. My daughter called again, this time with a tremor in her voice I hadn't heard since she was a child. Dad. I don't know what's happening, everyone's blaming everyone else, this is a nightmare. I sighed, pretending to be sympathetic. Family business troubles can be stressful, sweetheart. Just try to stay calm. The father started making mistakes, large ones. Panicked decisions, firing loyal employees, overreacting in meetings. Every action made the cracks in the family's empire widen. Every word of panic trickled down to the bride, who finally realized her perfect wedding bubble was bursting. And somewhere deep in the chaos, I allowed myself a small, quiet smile. They had treated me like nothing, but now every step they took was dancing to a rhythm I set. The first real domino had fallen, and now the second and third were starting to teeter. By the end of this week, one small push would bring the entire structure closer to collapse. And that push I was saving for the perfect moment. It was time they realized I wasn't just some frail old man sitting in the corner, nursing a cup of tea and wallowing in humiliation. No, I had a past, a sharp, dangerous past, and it was about to step out of the shadows. I started dropping subtle hints, little reminders of who I had been. A casual mention of a case I won back in '82, when speaking to my daughter, a reference to a friend in the Pentagon over dinner. Things they dismissed at first, because they didn't want to see the danger in the man they thought was harmless. But the seeds were planted. The father got suspicious. One night, he cornered me in the living room. Dad, what is it about you? Every time something goes wrong, you know something, you've connections. What are you hiding? I smiled, letting the old veneer of frailty slip for just a moment. Oh, you know, I've lived a long life. Seen some things. Learned a few tricks. You might be surprised what an old man can do when he's been underestimated. He laughed nervously, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. He knew something, he just didn't know what. Meanwhile, I began using that past to escalate the pressure. Old contacts, old favors, knowledge of contracts and financial loopholes, all carefully leveraged. The family started second-guessing every decision. Meetings became arguments. Trust evaporated overnight. And I watched it all quietly, as the puppet master. The perfect illusion of helplessness was gone. Behind the calm, gray eyes, they were seeing flashes of the man I had been, sharp, intelligent, formidable. But I wasn't done. The bride, blissfully unaware until now, was about to discover that this wasn't just a family feud. This was personal. And when she did, oh, the look on her face would be priceless. Because knowing someone underestimated you is one thing. Realizing that someone you mocked is actually a storm waiting to be unleashed. That's a different kind of terror. And the storm was gathering. It was finally time for the bride to meet the consequences of underestimating me. Up until now, she had been safe, untouchable in her wedding day bubble, laughing at the old man she thought I was. But I had a plan for her, too, and it was subtle, like a chess move that only shows its power several turns later. She began noticing little things. A delayed payment here, a missing contract there, whispers from business associates who suddenly seemed uncomfortable in her presence. Every small disruption gnawed at her confidence. And the more she tried to fix things, the more tangled the web became. One evening, I paid her a visit under the guise of a casual grandfatherly chat. She smiled, cautiously. "Dad says you're still upset. I just don't understand why." I chuckled softly, letting the words hang in the air. "Upset? No, my dear. I'm just disappointed. But disappointment can be powerful when people take it lightly." Her eyes flickered, a hint of doubt creeping in. That doubt was a seed, and I knew it would grow. Over the next week, subtle nudges from me, a well-timed call, a whispered suggestion to an investor friend, a casual mention of problems in the family business, amplified the chaos. Deals fell through. Employees panicked. And she realized, too late, that the chaos wasn't random. It was orchestrated. I let her panic stew for a while. It was important that she feel it, that she understand her sense of security had been an illusion all along. And when she finally confronted her father about my involvement, she didn't just see an old man. She saw someone who had the knowledge, skill, and patience to unravel everything she thought she controlled. I watched quietly, savoring the subtle shift in power. They had humiliated me at a wedding, laughed in my face, and assumed I was irrelevant. But now, they were learning the first truth about me: underestimating an old man with a past can be the gravest mistake of your life. And the storm was only just beginning. By now, the bride's family was fraying at the edges. The father had stopped sleeping properly, the mother was obsessively checking emails, and the bride was barely holding her composure. But they still didn't know who was really behind it: me, the irrelevant old man they'd humiliated at a wedding. It was time to escalate. I started leveraging my old connections in ways they couldn't anticipate. One evening, a quiet knock at my door brought in an old friend from my business days, a man who owed me far more than I cared to calculate. Over coffee, I outlined the plan: carefully timed audits, subtle legal nudges, a few rumors whispered to the right people. Nothing illegal, nothing traceable to me, but enough to make the whole family feel like their empire was crumbling under invisible pressure. Meanwhile, I fed them misinformation that made them doubt each other. Small, believable lies, just enough to make paranoia blossom. The father began suspecting the mother of leaking information. The mother, in turn, grew suspicious of the bride. And the bride, well, she started questioning every decision she'd made, every alliance she'd counted on. I even let the daughter, my own child, step closer to panic, giving her a faint hint that perhaps the man she'd dismissed was not just alive and well, but calculating. She tried to reach out to me, an olive branch in trembling hands, but I stayed quiet. I let her desperation grow. The best revenge is patience disguised as indifference. By the time the first major investor pulled out, citing internal instability, they were convinced the family was imploding on its own. They had no idea it was me, quietly orchestrating every domino, every misstep. And in that silence, I realized something: the true beauty of revenge isn't just watching them suffer. It's watching them doubt themselves, knowing that every mistake, every misstep, is a gift from the one they humiliated. The storm was gathering, and soon it would hit full force. By now, the tension in the family was palpable. You could almost cut it with a knife. But what they still didn't realize, and what they would soon discover, was that I wasn't just patient. I wasn't just clever. I was skilled. I had been underestimated for decades, and that was the perfect cover. Once, in another life, I'd been a strategist, not the kind that moves chess pieces on a board, though I was a master at that too, but the kind that manipulates entire networks of people, finances, and information. I had pulled corporations out of crisis and toppled entire criminal operations with nothing but a plan, timing, and subtle pressure. Now, that old skill set was back in play. I began contacting key players, investors, lawyers, and even a few high-level officials who owed me favors. I didn't have to threaten them, I only needed to remind them that I remembered everything. Reputation is fragile, and mine carried weight they had forgotten. I also started leaving small, deliberate hints for the family. A newspaper clipping of a court case I'd won decades ago, a name dropped casually during conversation, just enough to make them wonder if this harmless old man had secrets they should fear. And fear is a powerful motivator. The bride called one night, voice shaking. "Grandpa, what are you doing? Why are these things happening?" I smiled, though she couldn't see it. "Nothing, my dear. Just the consequences of underestimating people. Sometimes, the old ones know more than the young think." Her voice faltered. She realized too late that the man she had humiliated was capable of much more than she imagined. And in that moment, I knew the next phase of my plan would be explosive. The real reckoning was coming, and by the time it hit, they wouldn't just be humiliated, they'd be powerless to stop it. Because the game wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about proving that the underestimated grandfather was the deadliest player in the room. It wasn't enough to scare them, to make them panic. I needed leverage, something they couldn't ignore, something that would hit them where it hurt the most: their money, their reputation, and their illusions of control. I started quietly reviewing the bride's family business records, the contracts I'd acquired from my contacts, the minor discrepancies that would seem trivial to anyone else but screamed vulnerability to me. One by one, I pinpointed areas where legal pressure could be applied. Nothing overtly criminal, that would be sloppy, but loopholes and omissions that could trigger audits, investigations, or investor distrust. I reached out to a trusted lawyer, an old friend who owed me more than a few favors, and together we drafted a series of carefully worded letters and inquiries. Each one was polite, professional, utterly innocuous, and utterly devastating. Meanwhile, I played the family like a violin. The father grew paranoid, believing competitors were sabotaging him. The mother demanded control over decisions she didn't understand. The bride, overwhelmed by mounting issues, began snapping at everyone, fracturing trust further. One evening, I received a frantic call from my daughter. Her voice was trembling. "Dad, it's getting worse. Investors are backing out, and the auditors, they're asking questions." How is this happening?" I sipped my tea, feigning calmness. "People make mistakes, sweetheart. Sometimes the past catches up with you. Sometimes, you forget who you're dealing with." The beauty of this stage was that I didn't need to act aggressively. The legal net, the subtle pressure points, the fear of exposure, it was all doing the work for me. And the family, in their arrogance, never suspected the quiet grandfather they'd mocked. By the end of that week, the cracks had grown into chasms. And I had saved the final, most devastating move for later, the one that would leave them completely exposed. Because when you humiliate a man like me, it's only polite to let him finish the game. By now, the financial and legal pressure was suffocating them. But money and laws alone aren't the most effective weapons. People can survive audits, lawsuits, even scandals. Fear, doubt, and mistrust. That's where the real damage lies. I started planting seeds of doubt inside the family. Small, casual suggestions, the right word at the right time. The father began suspecting the mother of leaking sensitive information. The mother started doubting the bride's judgment. And the bride? She started questioning every ally she thought she had. I didn't speak directly to most of them. I didn't need to. A chance meeting here, a strategically worded text there, and the whispers began to circulate. Employees who had once been loyal now felt free to complain. Minor mistakes turned into crises. Every day, they blamed each other more than the world outside. Even my daughter, my own child, began to realize just how underestimated I had been. One night, she admitted in a trembling voice, "Dad, I think I finally understand. You've been orchestrating this. Every little thing." I leaned back in my chair, letting a shadow of a smile cross my face. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't the strike itself, but the fear that comes before it. Watching them unravel on their own, that's a luxury few get to enjoy. By the time they realized the extent of their collapse, the family was already at war with itself. Arguments that once could have been settled with a simple conversation had become shouting matches. Trust had evaporated. The empire they had built on arrogance and appearances was crumbling from within. And I was still the quiet, invisible hand guiding the chaos. The grandfather they had laughed at, mocked, and dismissed, was now the architect of their ruin. But the final act wasn't just chaos. No, the final act would be precision. And I had been planning it from the very moment they told me I wasn't welcome at my grandson's wedding. By now, the family wasn't just stressed. They were terrified. Every day brought a new revelation, a new misstep, a new humiliation, all orchestrated without them realizing who was behind it. And I was careful to tailor each consequence, each blow, to the person most responsible for my humiliation at that wedding. The father learned first. He discovered that several key investors had pulled out, citing irregularities he had assumed were minor. Panic turned to rage, and he lashed out at his wife, accusing her of incompetence. Of course, she had no hand in it, but by then, the seed of doubt had grown into full-blown paranoia. The mother was next. Her carefully cultivated social image began to crumble as whispers of mismanagement spread through their social circle. She called me one evening, voice trembling with a mix of fear and incredulity. "Dad, this can't be real. How could this happen?" I smiled, my voice calm. Sometimes, people forget that their actions have consequences. And sometimes, those consequences come from people they've underestimated. The bride, the one who had laughed at me most cruelly, was left with the sharpest sting. Her professional credibility began to falter. Mistakes she had brushed off were suddenly scrutinized, magnified. Investors doubted her judgment. Colleagues whispered behind her back. And with every misstep, I remained in the shadows, the silent ghost of her own arrogance. Even my daughter had to face reality. She began to see that by dismissing me, she had enabled the family's cruelty and arrogance. I didn't berate her, I let her guilt fester quietly, a constant reminder of the moment they had all underestimated me. By the end of that week, the family was fractured. Their trust in each other shattered. Their empire teetering on the brink. And all the while, I remained calm, measured, unseen, the grandfather they had mocked, now fully revealed as the strategist, the manipulator, the force they had ignored at their peril. But the final move, the one that would ensure the last domino fell and the entire web of arrogance and betrayal collapsed, was still to come. Everything was in place. The legal traps were set. The financial pressure was unbearable. The family's trust in each other was fractured beyond repair. And yet, the piece de resistance hadn't yet been revealed. That final move, the one that would leave them completely exposed and humbled, was ready. I called my old friend from the not-so-distant past, the one with access to records nobody should have, and arranged a discreet meeting. A few hours later, I held the last key in my hands, documents proving that the bride's family had not just skirted rules, but had outright mismanaged funds, manipulated contracts, and hidden assets. Enough to trigger audits, lawsuits, and public humiliation. Enough to make them fear not just the law, but the social consequences of their greed and arrogance. But this wasn't just about punishment. This was about revelation. I wanted them to see, finally, the man they had humiliated. The grandfather they had laughed at. The one who had quietly built a storm, piece by piece, behind the scenes while they celebrated their victory at the wedding. I left a copy of the documents where the father would find them first, his office, under a folder he trusted. Then I sent subtle hints to the mother, the bride, and my daughter, leading each one to the same conclusion: the web of lies and arrogance they had woven was about to unravel, and the hand guiding the unraveling was mine. That evening, I sat by the fireplace, pretending to read the newspaper. But I wasn't reading. I was listening. Waiting. And as the first sounds of panic began, hurried footsteps, frantic phone calls, the unmistakable crackle of desperation, I allowed myself a rare, quiet smile. They had humiliated me. Mocked me. Told me I wasn't welcome in my own grandson's wedding. But they had made the fatal mistake of underestimating me. And now, they were about to learn the full cost of that error. The stage was set. The pieces were in motion. And the final act. It would leave them stunned, powerless, and entirely exposed. The day arrived like any other, but for the bride's family, it would become unforgettable. By now, they were panicked, suspicious, and fractured beyond repair. Their empire, the one they had built on arrogance, cruelty, and entitlement, was teetering on the edge. And I held the hand that would push it over. It started subtly. Investors began demanding explanations. Auditors sent urgent notices. Employees who had been loyal suddenly spoke up about mismanagement. Rumors, whispers, small exposures, each carefully curated by me, converged into a storm they could no longer contain. And then came the personal strikes. The father received a call from a lawyer: mismanaged funds, irregular contracts, and potential civil liability. The mother's social circle turned cold as stories of financial missteps leaked subtly to the press. The bride, once so proud, found herself questioned at every professional meeting, her competence doubted, her arrogance laid bare. And my daughter? She realized, finally, the depth of the man she had underestimated, the grandfather she had dismissed, the strategist who had orchestrated every domino. By evening, the family gathered in the living room, chaos swirling around them. They didn't need my words, the panic in their own eyes spoke volumes. And I finally leaned forward, letting my calmness speak louder than anything else. You told me I wasn't welcome at the wedding. You humiliated me, mocked me, treated me like I was nothing. I let you think you'd won. I paused, letting the weight of that statement sink in. But underestimating someone like me? That was your greatest mistake. Then I handed them copies of everything: the documents, the evidence, the connections, the proof of negligence and arrogance. They read in silence, horror growing with each page. And as they looked up, eyes wide, voices shaking, they finally saw me as I truly was. Not a harmless grandfather, not a relic of the past, but a master strategist, a man with skills, knowledge, and patience enough to topple the empire they thought untouchable. It was over. Every thread of humiliation, every debt owed, every slight they had delivered, all paid in full. And they knew, without a doubt, that it had been me. They had laughed at me, cast me aside, thought me irrelevant. And in the end, the only thing that remained standing was the grandfather they had humiliated. Checkmate. I sipped my tea, quietly satisfied. Revenge wasn't about cruelty, it was about precision, patience, and truth. And tonight, the truth had finally spoken.